Well, hello everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Level Up Your AI Game Techniques for Clearer, Smarter Results. My name is Eleni Lepo and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Kite Technology Group. And our presenter today is Jason Gobbel, and he has a great session in store for you. Kite Technology is a managed IT service provider and consulting firm, and we serve small and mid-sized businesses across the country. We've been around for more than 30 years now, and we specialize in supporting independent insurance agencies, nonprofits, and other professional organizations. You'll see some of our key services listed here. So if you'd like to learn more, just send us a question in the Q&A panel and we'll reach out after the session. So with that, I'm going to send this over to Jason for you to introduce yourself and get us started. It's all yours, Jason.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Gobbel. I'm the Chief Solutions Officer and one of the partners over here at Kite Technology Group, also affectionately known as Jason GPT to some of my peers. We're going to talk a bit about generative AI today. I picked up a little bit of a cough, so you hear me clear my throat. I'm not contagious to any of you. But let's get started. So today's agenda, I was going to call it Hooked on Mnemonics because we're going to be talking about a lot of mnemonics, but I didn't think that would get the audience that I wanted, so we called it something different. So today we're going to be talking about a lot about generative AI, the common mistakes we make, and how to avoid them. And we're going to do that through structured prompts, creating personas that really guide the content. If you've played around with ChatGPT or Copilot, you know that sometimes you get some really great stuff and sometimes you get some not so really great stuff, and we're going to fix a lot of that. So refining those AI responses, creating a feedback loop, a surprise I'm not going to tell you about. I'm just going to show you. Hopefully it's going to be pretty cool. Then we're going to dive into some Q&A. If you think of anything along the way, throw it in the Q&A panel. If I can work it into the presentation, I'll do that. If not, I'll answer at the end. This is all new content, so we blocked an hour. I'm going to do my absolute best to honor that, but I'll stay around till midnight if we had the questions to support it. So let's dive in and we'll see where it goes. So let's start with why prompts matter. And the prompt is what you're asking Copilot, what you're asking ChatGPT, the words you're typing in, the questions, the queries, whatever the case may be. That is your prompt. Why that's important is because AI doesn't know what you mean. It doesn't think, although it's pretty close, probably better than some humans we know at this point. But it's really a predictive model. It completes patterns based on your input. Think about it this way. If I were to give you two phrases, a sunny day at the beach in Florida, people running and screaming, well, what would you think? You might think ice cream truck. That's where my brain went. I'm like, ice cream, we all scream. Most people say, oh, that's a shark attack. How did you know? I didn't give you any clues. I didn't give you any stuff, but you can do the predictive work to say, Florida beach, I've seen Jaws. This is a shark attack. That's exactly what AI does. It's the same way a lot of humans, what we call thinking. So you can see why it's, kind of runs hand in hand. So just like when you're talking with humans, if your input is very clear, you get really reliable output. It's asking the right questions, delivering the context, things like that. So we're not asking AI to guess. We're trying to get as much, paint as pretty of a picture as possible so that AI can kind of help us out. So let's talk about some common prompting pitfalls. Usually, when we're asking Copilot and ChatGPT some things, um, a lot of times it's too vague. Sometimes it's too much all at once. We might say, write some stuff about cybersecurity, or we might say, can you do this and this and this and this, and it gets a little lost. There's no format guidance. We're not telling it how we want to see it. Do we want it as an ebook? Do we want 2 paragraphs or 17 bullet points? We can be very specific with our prompts. And a lot of times we don't feed it that audience clarity. We're not telling it who we are. We're not telling it its role in the conversation, and we're not telling it what we're trying to produce the output for. Um, Above all, these tools are designed to be generalists, very generic, one size fits all. So if you're not giving it a tone or a role, if you're not telling it its very specific place in the world, it'll just generate some generic stuff. Sometimes that's okay, but a lot of times maybe you want it to talk like a pirate. Well, tell it that, and you'll get a lot of stuff. So sometimes we're just lazy. We just type out a question. Other times we don't even really know where we're trying to go with something, so the prompt is exploratory. That's okay. A lot of what I do in Copilot and ChatGPT is really just kind of exploring the space. I got half baked thoughts in my head, and I want to get them out, so I chat with it, and we take the long way around the barn sometimes, but we get to a point of clarity. And then once I hit that point of clarity, it's like, okay, now I know what to ask. I know how to put the pieces together. Uh, so let's get into that. So we'll start with a prompt, because prompting is one of the most common things you're going to be doing in these generative AI tools. Your Grok, your Claude, your Gemini, your Copilot, your ChatGPT, all these chat interfaces work off of prompts. So if you go back to elementary school, or maybe even early if you were smarter than I am, at some point somebody taught you order of operations in terms of mathematics. Do you divide first? Do you multiply first? Do you subtract? Do you add? And they probably said, well, at some point, just learn it this way. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, PEMDAS. And that's how we learned order of operations. When we learned the order of the planets, it was many vigorous Earthmen jumped straight up towards Pluto, which is now not a planet, or maybe it is. I'm not sure. But those things have stuck with me for 40 plus years now. So they work pretty good. So that's how we're going to learn this stuff today. So let's start with a prompting framework. We're going to call it PACE. There are many prompting frameworks out there. In fact, you can Google them, and some work better for certain types of tasks. These are pretty good all around the board. So if you're going to start somewhere, these are the ones to start with. So your prompting framework in PACE is really your purpose. What are you trying to create? What are you trying to achieve? Your audience. Who's this for? Who's going to be consuming what we want to create here? Any kind of context. Are we putting it into a certain perspective, or do we want to see it through a certain lens or something? And then an example of what the output should look like. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to do a bulleted list? Are we trying to create a blog content? Do we want it to be 700 words or 1500 words, or whatever the case may be there? So an example of this is, so what's our purpose today? Here's our example. We're going to create a 5-slide presentation on cybersecurity, because I'm a cybersecurity guy, so I get to pick the topics. Who's the audience? Small business clients, non-technical small business clients. Content. This is going to be delivered by an insurance agent during a lunch and learn. I'm sure that's happened once or 2 or 3 times as we talk about cyber liability insurance and things like that. And what should the output look like? Let's do a 3 to 4 point bullet point, plain English. We don't want to go over anybody's head. So this is how we write this is how we use our framework and we write our prompt. You can do this in bullet points, purpose, audience, context, example, and kind of work it together. So I like to start with that. I like to start with my bullet points, but language models work better with paragraphs. So let's rewrite this in paragraph form. So we have it written out. This is what it looks like. So you can see where we put the purpose, where we put the audience, the context, and the example. So pretty simple. Now we have our prompt. Anything you do with ChatGPT is going to have a prompt, but not everything requires a persona. So let's talk about what a persona is for a second. The persona is the role that you want AI to be. Sometimes it's just two people in the conversation. It's you and Copilot, or you and ChatGPT, and you just you want to craft an idea or something like that. But occasionally you want it to be something else. My Copilot, my ChatGPT, it learned a long time ago. I'm an IT guy. I run a managed services company. I talk with a lot of insurance agents. It knows a lot about me. But oftentimes I need it to see the world through the lens of a third party. So I craft personas. Sometimes I want it to be a claims analyst. Sometimes I want it to be a marketing expert. Sometimes I want it to be a pirate, if we're being honest here. So let's craft a persona. So we're going to use the ROSES framework for this: role, objective, style, expertise, and setting. Who's the AI pretending to be? I need you to be Blackbeard the pirate. The objectives: what are we trying to accomplish in this powwow session? And this is important because ChatGPT, Copilot, they go back to their memory in between chats. So if you don't tell it, it references its memory and everything it thinks it knows about you. So within the chat, within that window, you really need to define those objectives. What are we trying to accomplish? Because it might be fundamentally different than what you do for a day job. If you have a client and you're trying to see things through the lens of the client, you might want to create a persona that is your client so that you can then bounce questions off of it. So what are we trying to accomplish? What kind of style should we use? Do you want to be business, professional, lengthy and verbose? Do you want to be kind of bullet points? Do you want to be a pirate? That's an option. Expertise: what level of knowledge do they have? This is kind of a weird one, but it really helps Copilot and ChatGPT to kind of stay on message. If you want it to use plain language, oftentimes you might need to tell it your experience is kind of intermediary. And if you want to do marketing content, you really want to blow it out of the water, you're an expert. You're the smartest on the planet when it comes to this topic. And it'll use words and tone that's different. I guess the point there is you want to level your expertise similar to the language you want it to create an output. If you're trying to, as we are in this example, give a cybersecurity presentation to people who are not cybersecurity experts, we don't want ChatGPT or Copilot to assume the role of an expert. It might talk over everybody's head. Maybe we want an intermediary. And then the setting, what industry, what context, what are we trying to do? This is a good place to put safeguards, things that you absolutely want to keep off topic and away from it. If you don't know an answer, as an example, I need you to say, I don't know an answer. Don't attempt to guess at one. ChatGPT and Copilot do like to guess. So let's take this into, doing the same thing, doing our framework. Let's do our bullet points. So the role: a cybersecurity education advisor. The objective: we're trying to build trust. We're trying to explain risks. We're trying to give practical tips. The style is going to be friendly, plain spoken, no scare tactics, none of that. It doesn't work anyway. The expertise, intermediate level. You understand the risks and you explain them simply. And this is going to be important. So we keep our tone, kind of down to earth. We stay away from all the acronyms and all the techie stuff. And the setting, these are small businesses and professional services. So now, if we take that into paragraph form, because again, uh, the co-pilots and the chat GPTs of the world, they're better at having a standard language conversation. So now we got it in paragraph form. You're a cybersecurity education advisor who works with small business clients and professional services. Your goal is to help business owners. So we're talking to Copilot and ChatGPT here, telling it what it's doing for a living. This is the role you're filling. And you can see how this breaks down. So the role, the setting, the objectives, the style, the expertise. So let's put it all together. Now we did prompt and persona because you always have a prompt and sometimes you have a persona. So when you put them together, you actually do it backwards. You put the persona first and then you put the prompt. So we've put it all together here. And for the sharp eyes of you in the room, you're going to see that third little paragraph there. So we've got our persona up top. We've got our prompt in the middle. I always like to add a little extra info. This is, the challenge of working with a framework of any kind is that there's always some little stragglers or thoughts or things hanging around in your head. So a third paragraph is really good. You can reinforce the things you're trying to create. You can really define the priorities. The tone should be friendly, confident, and helpful. The goal is to educate and not overwhelm. You can fit those into a prompt and you can fit those into a persona, kind of squeeze them in. I like to put my safeguards in here. Topics that I want to include, topics I really want to exclude, things that I don't want to happen, things like that. Copilot and ChatGPT really work better with positive reinforcement, not negatives. So it's often easier to say, I want to do this, rather than say, I don't want to do that. But sometimes, statements like avoiding, you can't tell it not to hallucinate because it doesn't know when it's hallucinating. But you can say, if we're building this out, you're a cybersecurity education advisor, stuff like that. Maybe you don't want it to get into coverage conversations, things like that. So that might be some extra info you put in here. You're not a licensed agent, so don't talk about coverages. Don't, defer that to something else, or perhaps you want to do a follow-up. So that extra info there kind of fleshes the whole thing out, which is pretty cool. So let's try it out. So let's see what Mr. ChatGPT can do with what we just asked, what we just created. So I fed it our prompt, our persona, all the things here, and it created some stuff. So it did. Slide 1, slide 2, 3, 4, 5. Cool. It knows how to count. We asked for 5, it gave us 5. We asked for 3 to 4 bullet points. It kept true to it. The language is good. This is awesome. It's always going to prompt you for some stuff, and it's funny that it prompted that, because we'll get into that in just a second. But this is pretty cool. I mean, a simple, lightweight, 5-slide presentation. It gave us exactly what we asked for. So pretty cool. So now we have to refine that output. And this is where that human in the loop comes in. This is why Copilot and ChatGPT aren't going to take our jobs yet, because this is where the big brain has to meet the things. So we're going to follow another framework. We call it FLAG. This is how you evaluate what Copilot and ChatGPT give us. So first and foremost, fact check it. Is it accurate? Because sometimes it's not. So read through it. Is it logical? Is it coherent? We speak differently, we learn differently, and sometimes we don't do it in an order of operations that makes sense. For example, putting prompts and personas and then switching them. ChatGPT wouldn't think of that, but that's how we learn and that's how we practice things. So, is it logical? Does it make sense? Is it aligned? Does it match the request? And this is where you have to go back to your persona and your prompt and think, what was I trying to do? I was trying to give a presentation on a lunch and learn on cybersecurity topics. Yeah, I think it aligns. And then gaps. What's missing? There's always something. Um, maybe it's off topic, maybe it's something like that. What I often find is as I'm getting into this, I'll be 3 or 4 or 5 iterations as I'm kind of exploring the space and putting my idea together, and I'll see some output that's been created, and that'll give me an idea, or that'll give me well, I need to see it through this lens or this, or what's missing. That's going to be a conversation all in its own, all in your head. You might end up with a whole page and a half of notes about what's missing. You might find out that this was a bad idea. I'm going to start over and go over again. Perfectly fine. But this is that human in the loop. This is the most important part. Copilot and ChatGPT, they're going to save us a ton of time writing the words on the page, but we still have to bring our brain into the conversation. So once we've got some notes and we've rolled it around in our head and we've thought about it, now we move on to our fourth and final mnemonic, which is PCA. Praise, critique, and add. This is one of the things we often miss, honestly, as humans, but especially when dealing with Copilot and ChatGPT, we go straight to the critical and we forget to praise and state the things that we like. And this is really important, because if we just give it what we don't like, we've only given it half a guardrail. So when we ask it to refine the content, that whole other side is unbounded. We have no idea what we're going to get back because we only gave it one of the two guardrails. So start with the praise. Let's start and list all the things that we liked, so we know as we go down the iterative process, we know that it's not going to stray away from that. And then what needs fixing, then what needs adding. There's always something, and this can be minor changes, this can be very specific, this could be let's blow it up and let's start over with a whole different thing. Who knows? So I'm going to bring this up again one time real quick so we can see it and we can look through it. As I look through it, I'm like, okay, the bullet points, they're concise, they're accurate. I like the conciseness of it. That's pretty cool. But I do see some things missing. So what worked well? The bullet points, they're concise, they're accurate. Really like the formatting. Now for the bad stuff, the critique. In this particular case, I'm asking, because maybe I don't know, do these align with best practice standards and requirements for cyber liability? Because the thought occurred to me, the whole goal here was to get people to buy cyber liability policies for this cybersecurity presentation. So maybe we should ask that question. Does it align? And if it doesn't, adjust if necessary. Perfectly okay to ask Copilot and ChatGPT to fact check themselves. In fact, that's a point that you want to make and do all the time. ChatGPT is very good at course correcting when you ask it to validate, when you ask it to fact check itself. That doesn't take you out of the loop and it doesn't absolve you of your obligation. You still need to fact check the whole thing. But oftentimes when you ask Copilot and ChatGPT, through a certain lens or something, they will self-correct and say, this isn't clear, or this wasn't clear, or this was out of sorts. As we've seen ChatGPT go from version 4 to version 5, as we've seen Copilot go from 4 to 5. One of the things it allegedly does better, and I say allegedly because it's still new and it's still learning, is it fact checks better than it ever has. That's what OpenAI tells us. Um, as I've put it through some testing here over the last couple of weeks, I think that's generally a true statement. So let's add some stuff. The obvious thing to me that was missing were the speaker notes. Um, so let's add some additional slide content on how the presenter can help businesses acquire, because that was the other thing that was missing. I was like, I forgot the speaker notes, which are kind of important, and I forgot the call to action. At the end of the day, we want people reaching out to us and following up and have a conversation. So as we learn these things, take note of them, because this is what you want to put in your prompt initially. So as you're saving and you're writing and you're storing these prompts for reuse and creating some things, that's something you're not going to have to course correct every single time. So, but let's do it in this case. So, we added some speaker notes, things like that. Let's ask it. Let's see what happens. So I put in that specific thing. I described what I liked, what I didn't like, and what I wanted changing. So here we go. So now we have a 6-slide presentation of why cybersecurity matters. Kept it on topic. It did make some changes. So you'll see here, it added a little bit. It fact checked it against some cyber liability common requirements, which is cool. So now I've got slide 1, I got some speaker notes, I've got slide 2, speaking notes, slide 3, slide 4, slide 5, and then ultimately slide 6. So pretty cool. It did exactly what we asked, and it did it exactly in the format. So now we can take this and take our persona work, and we can take our prompting work and kind of generalize it. Maybe tomorrow we're not talking about cybersecurity. Maybe tomorrow we're talking about, how to avoid, lifting injuries on the job, or how to avoid slip and fall claims. Whatever the case may be, you slightly modify the prompt and it's going to generate output in the same form and fashion that really aligns with your brand. So if you're doing 10 different lunch and learns on 10 different topics, you change a little bit of a prompt and bam, you've got consistent formatting that follows a path and does a really good job. Are we ready for a surprise? I'm gonna drop that screen over for a second, and I'm gonna get you over here. And this is where it's either gonna go really good or really bad, because we're doing all this live. So could be a good time. Could be an apology waiting to happen. So I'm gonna take my slide deck here. I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna paste it, and I'm gonna go over to gamma.app. This is it's an AI service that just creates cool stuff, all kinds of stuff. You want to create landing pages, you want to create presentations, whatever, really cool stuff. But in this particular case, we're doing a cybersecurity presentation. So we're going to go to Gamma and we're going to paste in some text. We're going to do a presentation. We're going to do a standard 16:9 widescreen situation. I'm not going to give it any more context than what we have. I could, but let's just see what happens. I'm going to throw slide 1, slide 2, all my speaker notes, all the things. I'm just going to dump it in here and see what happens. Let's see. Do we want to summarize long text? Preserve the exact text? No. Let's generate from notes and an outline. Let's give it a little bit of latitude to make some stuff up. We'll see how it goes. Continue to the prompt editor. So we're going to generate some stuff. Let's make it concise. You know, this is a lunch and learn, right? We don't want to take everybody's time up there. Um, you know, we're going to write for, it already pulled this out, which is cool. Um, it already pulled the tone out, which is cool. I don't know that I'm a big fan of purple, but I do like some blue. We'll go with blue and we'll generate this thing. We'll see. Maybe we'll get lucky. Um, so as you can see, you know, this is yet another AI building off of an AI product, and it's putting all the stuff together. And you're going to see some of the stuff that you can identify from our slide deck. It might add some other stuff. I already see, I've just went past the page, but I'll bring it up in a second. It added some stats that it pulled from the world. It didn't pull from our content. So it's actually doing a little bit of enrichment here, which means we got to fact check those things because we don't know where they came from. We got to make sure it's accurate, especially if we're going to get up in front of a bunch of people and show this thing off. We're going to fact check it, but you know, let's see what happens. So now we've got a fully built presentation that we've used prompts and personas, Copilot, ChatGPT, created the slide deck, threw it into Gamma, and now I got something that once I fact check, I can kind of walk out the door and do a presentation and do a lunch and learn and stuff like that. And it does a pretty good job. You know, it's got some graphics. Here we go. This business email compromise. You know, this average loss exceeding $125,000 per incident. I happen to know that's a true statement, but you can fact check that. So it does a really good job of putting it together. So the days of PowerPoints, the days of, you know, aligning all the things, the hours and the hours and the hours that we spent on those things, pretty cool. This works well, and this is, you know, minimal effort. We haven't even gone through a couple of iterations of making this our own and giving it our voice and giving it the stuff. You know, we've just hit the ground running, and we're 30-ish minutes into this thing, and we're ready to go out the door and earn some business. So pretty cool stuff. So let's talk some next steps real quick, and then I see some questions coming in, and we're going to get to the questions. So next steps, if you've ever attended any of my webinars, you do not leave without any homework. I do that because I never liked homework, and all my teachers gave me homework, and now I get to give a little bit of that back to you. But at least my homework is pretty cool. So the next steps, my challenge to you, my call to action. I want you to start building those personas. At some point, you're going to end up with a library of personas. You can keep them in OneNote, you can keep them in all those things, but you should really have 3 to 5 personas at the ready. That's how I'm going to fact check your homework. If you got 3 to 5 personas, I'm going to give you an A. This is almost a guaranteed A because I'm going to follow up after this webinar, and I'm going to give you the 5 that I built. And you can have them. Again, put the human in the loop. Don't just use them verbatim. Make them your own. I want you to practice, you know, giving them your tone, your life, your experience, all those things, and create those 5 personas for your business. You will use them again and again. I want everybody to walk away knowing that learning AI it's a journey. It's not a destination. It changes every week. Every week there's a new tool, there's a new process, there's a new way to think about things. ChatGPT 4 just became ChatGPT 5, and what does that even mean? And we got to figure it out. This is a whole life's work ahead of you, which is really cool, really exciting. There's a QR code here. If you feel like scanning it because you just can't wait, go ahead. We've created an infographic that's got the frameworks that we discussed. That'll take you to our website. If you don't have your phone handy or you just don't feel like it, that's cool too. We're going to send it out with a follow up. So you don't need to take notes or anything. We're going to make sure you get the infographic with the frameworks. Um, we've formatted it so you can print it out. I would say print it out, stick it on your desk, stick it on a wall until these things have kind of become part of your brain. Eventually, you'll move beyond it and you'll just be crafting in paragraph form, which is cool. Um, but this is a great way, something to have in your tool stack, so you can go out and teach others and get those folks trained up as well. So I want you to, in your business, identify a change agent. Not everybody is comfortable with AI. First of all, some of them, especially artists, they got some ethical objections, which is fine. But a lot of people think it's going to throw them out of an airlock. They may or may not be wrong. We'll have to see what the future holds. But everybody's at a different level, and everybody's got a different comfort level, and not everybody can really write the words and have a paragraph level conversation with a theoretical entity. Sometimes that's just hard to process. So um, don't expect everybody in your business to be, you know, Jason GPT or Sally GPT or Frank GPT. But somebody in your business is going to have to be the advocate, and always ask the question, what are we doing with the AI tools? What can we adopt? What should we adopt? How are these things? Somebody's going to have to spearhead, um, be the engine. If you showed up to this webinar, I'm assuming you're probably going to volunteer for the job, which is cool. If you decided it's not for you, you get to elect the next person. But somebody has to be holding the torch. And here's why. Because the next step and the next homework I want to give you is, we're going to take those prompts and personas, the 3 to 5 that I'm going to give you. You're going to craft them towards your agency. And then you're going to follow us on Kite Tech, follow the Kite Tech YouTube channel, because I'm going to show you how to create GPTs in ChatGPT, and I'm going to show you how to create agents in Copilot. They form the same function. So we're going to use those prompts and personas, and we're going to codify them so that we can build them into our tool stack, and then we can share them with the staff at large. So not everybody has to carry the torch, because you'll be in a position to carry the torch for them, and then they can take advantage of all the cool stuff. So that's how we're going to do it. This is what it's going to look like. So you've got your infographic today. You'll have your personas. They're going to be coming out in the same way. So if you subscribed, if you're in our newsletter, if you were getting the alerts for this webinar to show up in the first place, you're going to get those things. Nothing to worry about there. But you do need to follow us on YouTube, because that's the next place. You're going to start to see more of our AI content just going straight to the YouTube channel, because it takes so long to put these things together, and AI moves so fast, and we just want to get the content and the ideas and the thought processes out the door and in your hands as fast as possible. And YouTube's a pretty cool platform to get that done. So we got some upcoming AI webinars. Microsoft 365 Copilot, that's going to be a good one, for the folks who are doing that. And hitting the ground running with AI in your agency. It's going to be a little bit of this, maybe some cool tools talk, maybe a little security and safety guardrails. Going to be a good conversation. We're doing that with Big Eyes ACT, Agents Council for Technology. So that's going to be a good time. How we can help you get these things done. We do managed IT services. We also do applied Epic consulting services. We're also moving, obviously, into the the AI and consulting space. We've been doing this for a long time. We have a strong reputation. We lead with just doing this stuff. The advice is always free. We've kind of led over the past 20 something years. What is it? 30 years now? I don't. I'm old. We're old. We're all old. We've been doing this a long time. But one thing has remained true. We've always led with advice and education and really being good stewards of the environment. And that's not changing and that's not going away. So we're happy to help in any way, shape, or form that we can. Now let's get to some questions. So let's start with Brandy's. Can you talk about pros and cons of the paid version of ChatGPT? Yes, I can talk about that at great length. So let's put on the security hat first and foremost. If you're not buying a product, you are the product. When you think about Facebook, Facebook doesn't charge. Why? Because they need your data and they need your input. ChatGPT and similar services are no different. They need to learn, they need to grow, and they need to understand. So if I haven't paid for the service, I really have no reasonable expectation of privacy beyond the terms and conditions, which are really one-sided. It's very clear what I've agreed to provide OpenAI and ChatGPT, not so much the other way around. So I'm not a big fan of free services at all. If you want to play, you want to experiment, that's great. There's good, personal learning challenges and things like that you can go a long way with that. But it's $20. I encourage you to spend the $20. If it's Copilot, it's $30. It's definitely worth it. It establishes a business relationship. You can create team structures. You can create GPTs. You can save projects. You'll get the latest versions of the large language models faster. So when GPT-4 becomes 5 and then 5 becomes, I'd say 6, but they have weird naming conventions. So it might be 5.1, it might be 5.5, who knows? But you'll get access to those a little quicker. You get a lot of these systems run on what they call tokens or something like that, which is, fundamentally, how many words am I allowed to feed it? How often is it going to have to think about those and give me more words? These are context length chains, and you get more with the paid services. If we pick on Claude as an example, and there's probably a question in there somewhere that I'm just going to go ahead and answer it now. You've got several big players in the large language models. You've got ChatGPT, you've got Copilot, which is actually based off of ChatGPT. Shh, don't tell anybody. You've got Grok, which does some weird things sometimes. You've got Claude, which is great for concise documents, programming. Claude is fantastic for taking 100-page PDF. If you've got a Cincinnati insurance policy, it's 3 or 4 inches of printed paper. Claude is great at crunching that stuff. It's what it was built for. So at some point, you're probably going to find you might be paying for a couple of tools, or you've incorporated different tools for different things. There aren't a whole lot of wrong answers there. When you compare side by side, take everything we did today. Take our prompt, take our persona, and take our PCA. Feed it into ChatGPT, feed it into Copilot. Do it side by side on your screen. You will notice a difference. You will notice that Copilot is less descriptive. It is, even though we told in our prompt and our persona, we wanted friendly. We wanted, we wanted it to be down to earth. Copilot is that guy who can't take his tie off, which is good because sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want weird, crazy talk like a pirate stuff. So you'll end up having different tools for different jobs there. So next question, will AI save a persona so we can use it again? No, not exactly. That's where the GPTs come in. The GPTs are the codifying of your prompt, your persona, all the experiences that you want to give it. That's why the GPTs are real clear. Because in Copilot and ChatGPT, it knows some things, particularly when you go in and you give it a little information and setting it up, which is going to be yet another YouTube content that we're going to put out. When you get the paid version, you get access to some tools where you can really kind of introduce it to you a little more and feed a little more information. And that becomes part of its knowledge base. And as you talk through conversations and things, you'll notice every now and then it'll memory updated. It'll arrive at some core memories. So, when I tell it I'm Chief Solutions Officer of Kite Technology Group, I have a license, I have a PNC license here in Arizona, memory updated. It's going to remember that about me. But the persona is only going to live in that chat. So every single time I create a chat, I'm going to have to start it off and kick it off with, here's the persona for this chat. Here's the persona for that chat. So then we take those into GPTs where we define the persona and the prompting within itself. So I have a couple of them that I've pre-built. I have a claims analyst. I have a cybersecurity analyst. I have one that creates marketing and blog content, that I've told it, I just want you to write long form ebooks, 1,500 words. That's what I'm after. Every GPT you create is going to live and breathe off of that persona. And then I can share it with others on my team. So I can say, I built this claims analyst. Let me throw it over to you and you can check it out. You can throw your stuff in it. Okay, next question. I see that ChatGPT offers to create a PowerPoint presentation. I would be curious to see how it does. And you would be disappointed if we're being honest. So I would be curious to see how it does and see what it looks like in comparison to Gamma. You absolutely should. So I joke when I talk about delivering a PowerPoint presentation because it really just takes the text and it puts it into a PPT file. And so it's a little underwhelming sometimes. Gamma is fantastic for start to finish creating this magical thing. But there's a lot of stuff happening over there that you might not have control of. So if you're really wanting a consistent framework, for example, you'll see I'm creating in PowerPoint because I like my logo at the bottom right. And I know that when I turn this into video format, my video is going to be on the upper right. So everything's got to be a little left justified. So I can take my ChatGPT content, I can export it into PowerPoint, and it'll create the structure, it'll create the slides. And if I've taken the time to create a master template or something like that, I can then throw a template on it. So now I get consistency, I get a polished output. It's me, it's my brand, it's my colors, all those things. It does a very good job of taking the data, just the raw data, but it doesn't make it pretty. You still gotta make it pretty. Maybe that'll change one day, but consistently, that's what I've seen happen. As you think through, PPT and PPTX as file formats, they are very powerful and very complex, and there's a lot going on with them. So I can't really blame ChatGPT for not being able to craft the perfect presentation, but it saves a ton of time. Where we use it internally as an example is, I'll dump it to a slide deck, just raw footage. It'll create the slides, it'll do things, and then I'll hand it over to Eleni or Rachel. And then they make sure it's brand consistent and they put the templates on it and stuff like that. So by me having access to the ability to create the slide deck with the content, it makes their lives a lot easier, and then they can just focus on the things that that they do better than anyone. Okay, next question. Do apps like Gamma charge for their apps usage? And if so, how do you think we need to evaluate which of these thousands of apps make our decisions to buy and use? That's an excellent question. Um, so all these tools have a level of free. Lovable is another one that does these. Gamma. In the duration of this webinar, probably 3 or 4 different companies have launched competing things. That's just the nature of the AI game. Everybody's in on it, and all the stuff is happening. Everyone has a free version, and everyone has a tiered version. So as you look through the tiers and the pricing, you're going to find that the answer is obvious, just based on here's what you get in the $20 a month. Here's what you get in the $200 a month. It's going to be pretty obvious where you fit in the tier structure. What's the right tool for the job? That's going to change. Again, this stuff it's a journey, not a destination. So I'm using Gamma today because it's pretty cool. I'm using Lovable for some other things. Sometimes I spin up an account and I pay for 3 months, and then I move on to the next thing because it's cooler, or it's got an additional feature or something. That's why it helps to be on top of the stuff and always learning, because the tools they certainly do change a lot. That's kind of what we do here, and one of our primary missions is just to try and shortcut that as much as possible. So if we see a new cool tool that we're playing with, we're going to call it out. Next question. Are you suggesting flexibility with ChatGPT or a better Microsoft integration software with Copilot? How do you determine the better direction? Excellent question. A lot of it depends on where is the data? Where's the source of truth? Copilot does one thing better than anybody else, which is live within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. It has access to your OneDrive. It has access to your SharePoint, to your Teams files, to your mailbox, to all the things. And it does it in a secure fashion. So you can trust it more than you can trust the others. So Copilot has a role. Drafting emails, as an example. I don't search for anything anymore. I don't search for emails I can't find. I don't search for SharePoint files I don't find. I just ask Copilot. It's better at finding my stuff than I am. So if I'm looking for a flight that I booked or something like that, I always start with Copilot because it's going to find it so much faster. ChatGPT, on the other hand, it's now ChatGPT 5. We'll see how it goes. But ChatGPT has always been a good 6 months ahead of anybody else when it comes to crafting human language. When you're texting, and ChatGPT is going to create a much more natural feeling output in its language, in its paragraphs, in its pages, in its statements. It has adopted more of a human and conversationalist tone. Now, we've seen that change a little bit with ChatGPT 5. ChatGPT 5 is an attempt at merging all the models together. As ChatGPT they had version 4, and they had a couple of minis, and they had some 3s. And those models one was programmed to be concise. One was programmed to analyze data. One was programmed for deep research. So ChatGPT 5 is an attempt to get all of these things at your disposal without you having to know which one to ask for. It will get better over time, rather quickly, I imagine. Right now, sometimes it feels a little stiff and you have to tell it to loosen up, whereas used to be the opposite. So you're going to get a much better content generation. So when I'm writing creative stuff, when I'm writing presentations and things like that, that's the data that I throw into ChatGPT. When I'm talking business analytics and things like that, things that I want to hold close to the chest that are non-public, confidential, Copilot gets my trust faster than any other company. Next question. Can I create personas without prompts as frameworks for my future prompts? And how do you recommend I build up my personas? Um, you can. You can create those personas. Honestly, when you're just exploring them and putting them together, keeping them in OneDrive or Notepad or OneNote or something like that is perfectly fine. It's a copy paste and you're off and running. I like to turn them into GPTs when I find that I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. Claims analysis as an example. I need consistent output. I need those things. That's where I will take my persona and I will build it into the GPT. I see your follow-up question using Copilot. Sounds like we can't save them. You can. You absolutely can. I believe it's hidden behind the paid license for Copilot, but Copilot calls it an agent, whereas ChatGPT calls it a GPT. But that's where the persona lives. You will have to give it a bit of a persona, and you will have to give it a bit of a prompt because you're going to have to define the structured output of what good looks like. When I ask you a question and you respond to me, what are you going to look like? You're going to look like bullet points. You're going to look like a novel, whatever the case may be. So you'll find the two together. But in Copilot land, those are called agents, and you can absolutely save them and share them with the team. It's a good time. Next question. Can you tell us about Gamma? Is it a description? I just did a bit. Gamma.app. There is a free one. It's worth playing around with. If you do a lot of presentations and things like that, it doesn't even have to be external. If you do internal meet and greets and lunch and learns or things like that in your agency, Gamma is such a time saver to throw together. Here's a lunch and learn agenda. Here's some things we want to talk about. These are the people we've hired. These are the things we're doing. Throw it into Gamma, and you're ready to rock and roll through a lunch and learn presentation or something like that. It's a great time for stuff like that. You don't even need to pay for it. You only need to pay for it when you're using it more than what the free credits allow every month. Can Copilot help organize our 365 emails with distributing emails to different shared folders, or will we need to use another tool for that? You are going to need a series of tools for that. And a lot of them live within Microsoft 365. There are some other options. ChatGPT is doing now, and this is where it gets a little confusing because Copilot calls a thing an agent, which is a GPT in ChatGPT's world. ChatGPT also has a thing they call an agent, which is a fundamentally different than Copilot's agent. In ChatGPT land, an agent is something that you connect to things. You connect it to your mailbox. You connect it to your Airtable database. You connect it to spreadsheets or Gmail or whatever the case may be. You're giving it access to some tools. In Copilot land, that is not an agent. An agent is your living, breathing persona. But can it distribute emails and share some stuff? Yeah, it has some capabilities, and those capabilities are growing. But I think the question behind this question is really a scenario. Let's say I wanted a universal inbox for a clearinghouse of sorts. Certificate of insurance requests as an example. Certificate of insurance request comes into my mailbox. I want to get it to a shared mailbox so that work can get distributed to the people who actually do this stuff. Might not even be my team. Maybe it's maybe it's an outside party, a staff boom or something like that. You're going to need a tool, an automation engine. Make Zapier, Power Automate as an example. Power Automate to some degree is going to come with your Microsoft license. Um, the learning curve is real there, but it's there. It can automate those things and kind of orchestrate and live beyond. So um, depending on your use case, I would work with Copilot and see if it can accomplish what you're trying to do. And if it can't, then you're going to need, Azure's its big brain, its AI engine. It's going to need automate. It's going to need something like that. Next question. Using both ChatGPT and Copilot, I've been frustrated by receiving sandbox links for downloading results of the analysis. The sandbox is not accessible. What's the workaround? I'm not entirely sure, but I'll share what I think is the same thing that's happening. Is you start a chat, you do some things, and it provides you as an example. We could say, hey, make this a PowerPoint presentation. It's going to give you a link to a file. It works in the moment. Come back tomorrow, it's not going to work at all. Those links will expire as Copilot and ChatGPT kind of clear their memory of the conversation. The text lives on, the words in the paragraph live on, but those files do not. So when it's creating links and things like that, it's very important that you download those files and then you reference them in some way, because there will be a point where you're going to have to feed that thing back because it's going to forget what you talked about. And that's the difference between what it thinks of as memory, which is learning specific things about you, versus things that happened in the chat. If it didn't commit it to memory, and it won't commit a link or a file to memory, then it will forget that over time. All right. That is all our questions. We are only 4 minutes over, which I gotta say, I am a little happy about that.
You did awesome. So you guys had such great questions. We really appreciate you sending those our way. And thank you, Jason, for such a great presentation. And thank you all for spending time with us. We hope that today's session was valuable and that you learned some great strategies for using AI and getting better results from it. As Jason said, we have 2 more webinars coming up, so be sure to sign up for those. Registration is open, and you can sign up for those on our website or be on the lookout for the emails. And keep an eye on our YouTube channel because we plan on keeping Jason very busy creating more content for you. If you'd like to learn more about Kite Tech's IT and consulting services, you can reach out with any of the ways listed here. We'd be happy to talk with you all, answer questions, and explore how we can help. And please take a minute to share your thoughts in our post-webinar survey. We really value your feedback and it helps us create better sessions for you. Thank you all again for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.